Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. Now it's no surprise that this game I'm working on is slowly piecing together and it's going to keep evolving over and over and over again, and we need bigger lands and stuff like that. But to do all of that we need tools and frameworks, and while we could build a lot of them, like add maps in and make the interaction system we've got far better, add our own inventory and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot of time to do and cost a lot of money if I were to charge myself for making the game. And now it's no surprise that I am a big fan of the narrative toolset. So we've already got the quest and dialogue system in here, and we've got a bunch of different dialogues and quests in here already. So I figured in this tutorial slash video we're going to add all the current narrative toolsets into the game. So we've got the narrative quest and dialogue, and we're going to go and add in the inventory, the common UI, the navigator and the interaction all into our game, and then give them all a really basic setup so it's up and running. So let's get started. So the narrative toolset currently consists of 5 plugins, and we already have the quest and dialogue plugin in, but I'm going to quickly run through what each plugin is very basically before we start adding it into the project and do a really basic setup of them all, because then it massively expands what our game can do. So the quest and dialogue one, if you don't know what that is, literally just gives you a framework to create quests and dialogue in your game. It's got tons of features, so many users of it, and I've just used it for years. It's fantastic. So we're going to insert that one. We're going to use the narrative inventory system and equipment. This will mean we can pick things up, carry it around, do anything we want with it. It also means that if we start using it, we can come up with some more suggestions if it needs it, which is going to be even better. And it comes with an equipment system, so we can start maybe equipping armor and weapons to our characters, which will be even cooler. After that, we've got the common UI, which is slowly rolling out, and all it does is use the new Unreal common UI to give you cross-platform input, so you can have like Xbox, PlayStation, Switch controls without having to do any of the funky stuff we've had to do in previous tutorials. So common UI is really good to get set up. We're going to use the navigator, which I'm personally looking really forward to, because that'll give us maps, compasses, waypoints, on-screen waypoints, all other stuff like this. Super easy to set up, and then we can actually see around our game, which will be even cooler. And then finally we're going to use the new interaction plugin, which basically is going to replace our current interaction, but it's going to expand it so much more. We'll have on-screen controls, we'll be able to start dialogue, interact and do all this other cool stuff. That's just going to be more evolved than the current one I have. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to do is basically just download all the plugins. So I've got all the plugins here in an existing project, and I'm just going to move that into this project here. I'm going to go into my YouTube tutorials and in plugins. I'm going to delete narrative off of here. I'm just going to paste in this current one. This is all set up for my game already, and then I'm just going to restart Unreal and we'll be back. So we are back in our engine after it's rebooted, and if I go to edit plugins, I can start searching for narrative, and we should see all of the different plugins. Look how cool that looks. So we've got navigator for the maps, inventory, interaction, common UI, and narrative 3. So the best way to attempt this first is to start off with common UI, because there's a bunch of settings we need to change for that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to come to my content drawer, right click, and I'm going to do show in file manager, because there's some settings we need to change. So I'm going to come into my YouTube tutorials v3, so my project one, and I'm going to go into config, and I'm going to open default game INI. And this is basically all of the stuff that your game runs on. When it compiles, it uses this data. If you mess this up, just delete it, reopen your project. It should probably regenerate it, but you might lose a few settings. So in here you can see I've got my async loading screen, and I've got a couple of other little bits. So all I'm going to do at the bottom is I have the documentation of narrative common UI, and right here it just wants us to paste all of this in, like so. I can now cross this off because we don't need it anymore, and I'm just going to paste it at the bottom there. And you can see this basically comes in and sets up what our default input system is. So it's going to, instead of using the Unreal one, it will use the narrative input data, and all this does is tell the common UI in Unreal what it needs to use. And you can see for the Windows, it's got the current platform settings here. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this bottom line and add it below. And I'm just going to add a default one in for Linux, because I run Linux. And there we go. That's all I needed to do. So everything else is fine the way it is. So I can now cross this off and I can reboot once again. And now we're back in the game. So I'm going to go to edit project settings, and to continue setting up common UI, in here I'm going to search for viewport client class. So this game viewport client class. And this is how we basically enable called Common UI. This has nothing to do with narrative specifically, but what I'm going to do is come and select Common Game Viewport. And the benefit of Common UI is it allows you to easily change between different stacked UI windows and widgets. So if you're on a gamepad or a mouse and keyboard, you can just tab across to the next keys, or you can use a controller to navigate the inventory, and it'll all just work a lot easier than the standard Unreal widgets you'd have to code before. Next, I'm going to come down to the side where Game and Common Input Settings, and you'll see your platform inputs here. You need to make sure that your input data is set to the narrative input data, and then you need to make sure that your platforms that you want to support are all added in here. So for me, I just want to support Linux just for now. I can add it in later, and you can see the default gamepad name is set to generic, and then the controller data for all the different control schemes I'm going to use. So I'm going to click plus, and I'm just going to add PlayStation in here as well. And that's it for my Linux one. That's all set up. If you're doing Windows, just keep adding different platform inputs by editing the default game.ini. And this should be our final reboot now. And that's it. That is pretty much Common UI set up. So the only other thing we need to do now is we need to start adding the new way you can create widgets. So normally we come to like our player controller, and on event begin we come in and we just add to the viewport like that. However, with any plugins that support Common UI, we actually open it differently to how we normally would. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my UI folder down here, and I'm going to create a new widget just like we normally would. I'm going to make it a type of user widget, and I'm going to call it WB. Inside here, I'm going to add my canvas panel, and then I'm also going to add the new widget blueprint narrative HUD, this one here, and I'll just expand it to the full size. And all this widget is used for is whenever you use the new Common UI to spawn a widget, this narrative HUD is where it will store it. It will put everything in here. It will layer it correctly so you know which one is in focus and how to use it. And now back on my player controller, I'm just going to add this HUD to my world. So I'm going to drag off and do create widget. I'll do my HUD. I'm going to promote it to a variable, and I'll call it HUD, and then I will finally add this to the viewport. And to keep it clean, I'll wrap it in a comment as well saying add the HUD, and I'll compile and save. And that is pretty much it. If we were to start now, you shouldn't see any immediate difference. So you can see I can still walk around. Everything is still working fine. I can even come and start the dialogue and nothing changes. That's completely fine. However, this now means we can start integrating all the new cool UI stuff. Before we do continue, some of you might say, why have we not added the narrative HUD to it? As the time of the video, narrative 3.4 does not support Common UI yet. You can still put it in and you saw it all still works. All of your other plugins will still work. Narrative 3.5 will be adjusted to Common UI, so we'll just have to tweak it a little bit when that comes out, but for now that's completely fine. This will just take care of everything else. So next, let's add in an inventory. So the narrative documentation specifies if you're making a multiplayer game to add the inventory to your player state. For me, however, I'm working on a single player game, so I'm just going to add it to my player controller. So I'm going to add the inventory directly into it, and then I'll compile. And now we need to load our inventory up. So I'm going to just come over to my blueprints, and I'm going to come into my character logic inside my ALS, and then my blueprints input, and then I'll go into default and add a new one in here. I'll just copy attack, and I will call it IA open inventory. Then I will come back out and I'll go into my default here, and I'm going to add another one to the very bottom of all this, which will use my open inventory one. And then I will say on PC I want to use the I key for inventory, but equally I want the tab key to also do it. And then on gamepads I will use the back button, so I'll use the special left button. I believe that's the back button on, or select on buttons. Yeah. And I'll compile and save, and I'll jump back into my ALS player controller here, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to do my open inventory enhanced input action. So this is where we use the new way of opening menus. So I'm going to drag in the HUD. I'll drag off of this and do get the narrative widget HUD, and then from this I'll just call open menu. I'll connect that to started, close it up, and it'll say what do you want to open. So you can see I've got a bunch of different ones, but I want to open the inventory. So I will compile and save. And for some reason my ALS controller is still not allowing me to do inputs for some reason. It's something I need to look at and fix. As soon as I do, I'll put a tutorial out. So all we're going to do for now is come back to my player, and I'm going to open it up. Then just underneath all the other stuff I've done, I'm just going to come and paste these controls in. Then it'll say that it doesn't know what the HUD is. So what I'm going to do is come back to my interfaces that I have already set up. So I have a blueprint interface called BP player controller, and in here I'll just make a new function called get HUD, and I'll make sure the output is the HUD and the data type is our widget blueprint HUD, like so. Now I can compile and save. Back on the player controller, I can now implement this interface, which will get the HUD, and now it'll return it back. I always do this. Just make sure you call it something other than get HUD, because it gets confused with Unreal's default HUD system. Compile and save. Now we can come back to this, compile and save. That all works. And now back on the player, instead of HUD, I can just right click and do get player controller, and then from here I can just drag up and do get get HUD. And this should return the player HUD for us. And now when we hit compile and save, we can jump into the game, press the I or the tab key, or if you're on controller, press the select button. It should open the inventory. So now if I press the tab key, you see we have our inventory. Perfect. We've got all of the keys down here for us to do stuff. I can change the options to whatever I want, filtering, ordering, and I've got my groups up here. Eventually all of this can be changed to whatever we want and we can add items, but for now that is pretty cool. So I'm just going to come in and change some default settings on the inventory. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to set the current currency. So we'll say he's got 50 gold at the moment. The inventory friendly name I'm just going to set to players inventory, and then I could add in a default item. I haven't got any created yet, so I'll just do an example item. And now when we start the game, you can see we've got players inventory, we've got some currency at the bottom, and we've got a default item which we can use. So in the future we're going to customize all of this, do whatever we need, get some custom UI if we need to, all of the cool stuff like that. So for now that's the really basic inventory setup. So let's move on to the next step. Let's add in the navigator. So I'm going to jump back to the player controller again, and I'll just add the next component of the navigation component, and I'm going to hit compile and save. The only other thing we need to do is come back over to the HUD, and we now need to add in the components we need for the navigator. So for me, I know I want a minimap, so I'll add the minimap in, and I'm going to set it to, let's do the bottom corner down here, GTA style, and I'll set it to about 200 by 200, maybe 250 by 250. We'll see how that looks. And I'll also add a compass because compasses are just cool, let's face it. And I'm going to center align it at the top of the screen. We could equally do the bottom one, and I'll set the size X to about 600 and then the size Y by 60. There we go. So it looks a bit messed up now, but when it actually renders it, it will look far better. So now that we've done that, all we need to do next is take a screenshot of all of our map so narrative can display it correctly, basically. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my window up here, and I'm going to go world partition and world partition editor. So we've got all of this. I'm going to come up, and this is one of the rare instances where I'm going to actually make everything visible. And the reason we're doing this is we need to take some screenshots of the map so we can tell the navigator this is how it works. Because it doesn't just use a camera at the top, it renders an image and moves it so it's really efficient. There we go. So everything looks really, really bright now. It's all there. My computer is lagging ever so slightly, but this is not permanent. So the next thing you want to do is you want to hide anything that can be moved or that you don't want on the map at all. So for example, I don't want the NPC on the map, so I'm going to hide him, and I'm just pressing the H key. I don't want the player start on there. I don't think it picks that up anyway. If you press G, that's pretty much what you're going to have. But I don't want the elixir bottles there, the stolen goods, so I'm going to hide all of them. I don't want any of the NPCs here. I don't want the generic barrels here either because they're damageable. There we go. Is that everything? So the map's not going to capture everything, of course, so it's not going to be able to capture here. If it's capturing up there, it'll just capture rocks, but it will be able to take the most of it. Eventually in the future, I will plan on making these boats drive around. For now, I think I'm okay where it is, and I think I've pretty much got everything I need. Perfect. So next I'm going to come in and add in the map tile bounds actor, and all this does is tell Unreal this is how you generate it. So you can see you've got the outline of here. This is the size of the minimap, but we know we want the minimap to be slightly bigger because we've got all this stuff up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to press Control. We'll grab this, we'll move it up like that. We want it pretty much above the highest point in that we want our map to track. So you can see that castle there is probably the highest point, and the map's just above it like that, which is okay. It might not look so good when we get down to here, but we'll have to have a look after that. So we need to increase the size of it, so I'll Alt-J again to see the outline there, and I'm going to come to the details, and let's just increase the size to say 30,000. How big is that? Is that covering everything? And that's not covering everything, it's covering more water, so let's just move it around a bit, just so I've got everything that I want in the map on the map. And I think that'll do, to be fair, just right there, and it'll basically take a screenshot of everything down there. So at the moment it's doing 3 tiles, so it'll do 3 by 3, but we've got a pretty big map, so instead of 3 by 3, we've tripled the size. Let's triple the distance, so we'll do 9. There we go. And now we need to activate the editor script to say basically start taking the screenshot. And don't worry about anything that moves in the game. So like if you did want your characters in there to move around on the map and stuff, we can sort that later. For now, this is just taking a picture of all the idle parts of the map. So I'm going to come into my content drawer, and if you can't see your plugins folder, just make sure you've gone to settings and ticked show engine content and show plugin content. Depending where you've installed your plugin, it might be in different locations. So for me, I have got the narrative navigator content here. I'll go into Assets, Map Tile Generator, and you'll see this utility generate map tiles. So I'm going to right click and do Run Editor Widget, like so. And we're going to have this big needs to be edited widget here, and it's say where do you want to save it. So by default it'll save it as your level name. For me, that's okay for now. I'm going to come and click Generate Tiles, and what you're basically going to see is it will lag my computer a little bit as it's saving all the files, but it's going to basically create a 9x9 grid throughout all of this, and then take the camera and put it on each one and go take a shot, and it'll say take a shot, take a shot, take a shot, take a shot, and it'll save 9x9 images to my folder, and that's how it'll generate the map. So let's click Generate Tiles. So you can see it's now generating the tiles one by one like that, and it will eventually move the camera across and take all the pictures. The reason it's popping up and doing it a little bit slowly is every single time it generates a tile, it adds a delay which saves the tile so it doesn't crash later. So I'll be back just when this starts doing the cameras. And I couldn't actually show you the cameras doing it because it's zoomed over it really quickly. But there's all the tiles here, and you want to keep these tiles in the game, because if you don't, then Narrative Navigator won't know where to place the images on here. So that's why you put it high up so it doesn't bother you. You can also hide it as well. So now if we come back into our plugins content drawer here and go to map tiles, you'll see we've got a new level 01 folder, and there is a screenshot of every single bit of our map here. Perfect. So on one of these you should be able to see the little port at the bottom. I don't know where it is, but we'll look at this one. So you can see we've got an orthographic view showing it like so, which is all the different paths here, and eventually we'll have our player icon walking around. You'll be able to see it, it'll look epic. And now in theory you just click play and we should have a working compass and a working minimap just like that. And I can see I have a map, I turn around, it works, I can come up, I can see these purple things here, I can walk around this path here, and you can see as I move around it will successfully map the entire thing out. So let's get rid of these barrels. So you can see as I walk down here, I can see the guard here. Let's talk to him and he'll say I have a pass. Let's open the portal. The portal will open up. I can hit this and it's teleported me up here. So now as I walk around, I'm facing in here. One thing that I have suggested for the Navigator plugin is the ability to change the map that you're on, so we can start taking pictures dissectingly. So for example, on level 1 we have no mountains there, we just show what's on level 1. Level 2 we'd have all of this mapped out, and it's not until you come over here that you actually start to see it. And then on level 3 we have everything up here mapped out, which looks really cool. There we go, we now have a map. We have a compass at the top as well, which works as well. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? Super basic, but it works really well. So the final plugin we have to install is the interaction system. So the reason I really like this interaction system is our interaction system currently is a basic cube trace. It fires a cube directly in front of you and picks up anything it finds, and then we have to hard code all that logic in for everything that we want to use. So whilst that is really good, the interaction system has a bunch of components already built in to do so much of this, which makes it a lot easier for us to use. And then it does so much more things, like if we want to hold to unlock something, if we want to code something specifically, we can do all of that nice and simple. So the way I'm going to start is I'm actually going to replace my NPC's interaction with the interactive plugin. So the first thing I'm going to do is come to my player controller, and I'm going to add the narrative interaction component like so, and I'll compile and save. I'm going to come to my NPC and I'll press Ctrl B to find the source, and I'll open it up. I'm going to add the new begin dialogue interact component like so, and then in here it'll ask us what we want to choose the dialogue and stuff, which I'm going to ignore just for now. I'm actually going to come to my class settings and I'm going to remove my interactable interface like so, because I don't want it anymore. That's fine. And then I can make sure all of the can interact, get interact text, and the interact function, I'm going to make sure all of these are gone because we don't really need it. And that was our testing for the relationship, so again we don't need it. I can hit compile and save. I can come back to level 01, I can click him, and in the components down here I can find the begin dialogue, and the dialogue I want to assign to him was Bob. The interactable name I will just set to Bob. We could easily code this in so it does it automatically. That's something we'll look at in the future, and it'll say talk, so it should say talk to Bob. So now that we've customized his dialogue options, we need to actually add the UI in so it can say press XYZ to talk to them. So I'm going to come back up to my WB HUD and I'm going to add in the interaction widget here, and I'm going to drag it into class panel. I'm going to tick size to content because I always find it easier if it's ticked, and I'm going to put this at the bottom anchor there, but I think I'll move it up by say -300. Does that look decent? Yeah, that might be okay. And I'll hit compile and save. So the only other thing is to override our interact function here. So because I haven't figured out why the keys aren't working on the player controller just yet, we need to replace this interact function here on whatever we're looking at interactively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my player here, so where my current interact here is, and I've got my try interact. So I'm going to keep my interact here, and on my try interact from the previous tutorials, which is just an interact key like that we added earlier. It calls try interact, which is an interface I've created on my VPI player controller. And then that means on the player controller here, instead of try interact like it's done here, we don't need the clear interactable either. And we don't need this big chunking line trace thing. So we can also get rid of the looked at interactable and can interact. And we don't need the event tick here either. So back on here. And then all we do is drag in the narrative interaction and we drag up and just call begin interact like so. So it's important that you need to call end interact as well. Otherwise we won't actually be able to tell it when we've released the key. So I'm going to come back to my player controller interface and I'm actually going to rename the function on it. And instead of try interact, I'm actually going to call it begin interact. And I'm going to duplicate it and just add another one called end interact. And now we can hit compile and save. So when we jump back into our player controller, we can add the end interact in just under here. And just off of the narrative interaction component, I will just call end interact. And what this basically means is if you set it up to hold to open a door and such, then narrative knows when you've clicked begin and when you've clicked end, and it can work out all the timings itself nice and easily. And otherwise, if you just press it and let go, it will run. Sometimes when you call begin interact, it will do whatever it needs to straight away, so letting go won't really affect anything, but it's still there if we need it. And finally, I'm going to come back to my player, and just after completed, I'm just going to drag off and do end interact and plug that in on completed. So if we start it, call begin. If we complete or we cancel for some reason, maybe we can't press it at the time, it will just call end. And now hit compile and save. So let's give it a go and see what happens. So one thing you will notice is the interaction won't actually do anything at the moment, no matter what you do. And the reason it does this is incredibly strange, and I'm not sure why. It's something to do with Unreal, and basically narrative fires out and it sets a line trace, just like we've discussed before in previous tutorials. And what it does is we come and select the skeletal mesh for what it needs to find, the body here, and we go to the collision settings. If we select the capsule mesh here and find the collision settings, it will be set up to be a type of pawn there. But you'll notice if we open it up and look at the trace responses, visibility is defaultly by Unreal set to ignore, but the camera is set to block as well. So looking online, there's not a lot of documentation between what the two trace responses are. They're full line traces, but there's no difference. And the article I found explained it the best way I think it sounds. Visibility is for anything that's invisible. Camera is for anything that should affect your camera directly. So if you can't go through a door, you want to block the camera. But that calls into question, why is visibility set to ignore in the first place? If something's visible, why is it being ignored by line traces? I don't know, but it's a super easy thing to change. So what we're going to do is come up to edit, project settings, and in here we're going to click on collision under engine. And then if you open up the presets on trace channels, you will see we have a pawn here. So I'm going to double click it and you'll see it's set to ignore visibility. I don't know why, so I'm just going to click block and click accept. And you'll notice now this has changed over here. And just with that simple tweak, your line tracers will now detect anything you've set to a collision profile of visibility. So anything that's visible, you should be able to interact with. If it's not invisible, then you can't interact with it. So now if I run up to the guy here, he should start, and there we go. Bob is now glowing for us, and we can press E to talk, and it begins the dialogue just like that. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? We can now walk around. We have our minimap at the bottom. We have a fully fledged inventory we can use. We have the quest and dialogue system. We have the interaction, and everything is going to be so much easier going forwards. As I said at the beginning of the video, we could have tried to create this all ourselves. But reasonably, how much time do you think you'd have to put in creating the minimap system to take all the pictures, work correctly, handle the rotations, and do everything it needs to? Because we've barely scratched the surface of all the plugins we've put in just yet. And same with the inventory. A full complex inventory here with scrolls, all the item previews, the 3D preview, all of it. That's going to take some time to do. And you'll notice that my minimap is currently on top of my inventory. One quick fix for that, just while we were talking, is you just need to reorder the things here. Now I'm going to make sure the narrative widget is at the very bottom, which means anything that renders will be on top of everything else. And we can compile it. So everything here is now just saved us potentially months, maybe up to a year's worth of time on development, because we no longer need a quest and dialogue system. That's all done. We don't need a map and marker system. That's all done with points of interest as well. We don't need inventories. We don't need shop and trader dialogues. It's all built in. Now this is not a sponsored video. If anybody wants to sponsor me, please do. It'll be so cool. It's just because I like the plugins and it's going to massively advance the potential for my game to carry on. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you like this quick tutorial to get into it. Of course, if you need more in-depth tutorials, please look at the documentation for them because it's so much easier. But now with this, I can crack on. I can make some shopkeepers. I can make bigger maps. I can make save beds and all other cool stuff like that. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Decryption and I will see you next time.